everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. This is a community where photographers meet to connect, inspire, and create. Our guest speakers share their images, tips and techniques, and a little bit of inspiration to help us all learn a little bit more about photography. The schedule for upcoming presentations is on my website at lindanickell.com, as well as the links to previous sessions on YouTube. Tonight, my guest is Bryan Scanlon. Bryan is an amateur photographer and a professional writer and marketer. He's got 2 writing degrees, and with those, Bryan has written many articles for a variety of clients that include Fuji Love to Forbes magazine. The Photo Enthusiast Network has twice named his work Photo of the Year. Bryan joins us from Walnut Creek, California, and you can connect with him through his website at bryankscanlon.com. And if you're on Instagram, you can find him at bkscanlon. I'm going to link those to the show notes so that they'll be easier for you to find him. But in tonight's presentation, I want to know your name, classic storytelling techniques to transform your art. Names have power, and Bryan is going to share his writing skills to help you employ classic storytelling techniques that can help you. Welcome to the Happiness Hour, Bryan.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
I so appreciate you coming and joining us. And we were talking about this off camera, but I ran across you because you were one of the attendees for the Out of Chicago photo conference this last spring. And what they did was they allowed the attendees to they gave them 7 minutes to do whatever topic they wanted. And I listened to yours, and you were talking about coming up with ideas and giving your work names. And I was a little fascinated because that's something I struggle with. And I'm very thrilled to have you. And you've already got your presentation up. So I'm just going to let you jump in, introduce yourself. If I skip something, or, sometimes I gloss over and I might have missed
okay. Yeah.
So with that, it's yours.
So my name is Bryan Scanlon. It's really great to be here. As Linda was talking, I'm an amateur photographer. But I am a professional writer, and I spend my work days and the vast majority of my life essentially telling stories, often for complex technologies that most people never see or even understand. But my classical training is actually in literature and in creative writing and poetry. And what's really fascinating is a lot of those skills translate into not only everyday life things, but also into photography. So today I want to talk about naming and storytelling, and we're going to look at very classic things that people study in literature and how they apply. It will be very practical, so you can put it to work. And I encourage you to throw up questions, interject, particularly if there's something that's of interest. I would love to see and hear those and address those as we go. So with that, let's get started here. So this is what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about the power of names, like why names carry power and why they can be important. We're going to go through about a baker's dozen of classic storytelling techniques with examples of photos that apply those techniques. We are going to talk about some considerations, some cautions, like things you may want to consider not doing when naming, or things that might have some risk. And then practically ways to start. This can seem very daunting, but some very just simple ways that you can start to get this going. So So let's roll. Let's go through this. So first of all, names have power. Since essentially the beginning of literature and art, there is this thing called the law of names. And when someone is able to name something or to invoke a true name of somebody, it actually empowers them. It creates magic. It creates a sense of like, I am now able to control or influence or spark an emotion. So in the Bible, Adam gains power over all the animals by being able to name them. In ancient Egyptian history, Isis is able to trick Ra into giving up the kingdom by knowing his true name. Halloween, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. It's a classic thing here in October. Comedians, I don't know about you, but during COVID and well, still now, I binge watch every comedian on like every streaming platform. If there's ever a heckler, the first thing the comedian does is ask that person's name. Why? Because it transfers power a bit. The person has to give up their name. It becomes a different kind of relationship. And personally, my favorite is just Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. But having names is embedded in art and embedded in culture. And it applies, potentially that power can be applied to your photographs. So trick number one technique is subject. In photography, we always obsess over what the subject is. We spend a lot of time on it. In literature, this is the protagonist, hero or heroine. Like this is the person that is the main focus of the story. And they are typically on a journey. So you could start in your checklist of how do I name this photo with just actually looking at the subject and saying, is there an appropriate name for the subject? So in this case, this gentleman in Cuba is standing out on his porch eating breakfast one morning, literally like he owns the village. Maybe he does. Maybe he is the mayor. But naming him the boss is great, but even better is El Jefe by transferring that into Spanish, which is a very common Spanish term. So it's able to do it, but it changes how you look at this photo a bit. You could have called this breakfast in Cuba, right? But, he has this belt buckle that says boss. And it just changes the perception and really zeroes you in on, oh, there's a story about this person here. Two is to fill in the blank. I don't know if anybody remembers Mad Libs, but this this little notion of like, this looks or feels like something, which is metaphor or analogy, and we won't get into the differences between the two because it's not that important. But this notion of this looks like something, and it may be it may not be what it actually is. So in this case, I'm a writer, and these incredible mountains end, and there's this lone tree, and the first thing I was like, wow, that looks like an exclamation point. And it's great because it's like, wow, amazing mountains, exclamation point. And you're able to do that. But you could feel like, so what is the subject maybe? And this looks like or feels like. So this is also, this is a very famous classic shot that everybody is seen of the Snake River. Ansel Adams has done it. One of the great things about names is they can breathe life into like classic locations. So in this case, obviously blessed with fresh snow and a ridiculous sunrise, right? So it could have been Sunrise at Snake River. That could be a title for this. But also it's morning. Morning is breakfast. By the way, all of us photographers don't eat breakfast because we're out chasing sunlight, and it's more like we eat brunch. Uh, but the sky looks like, so let's apply this. So the sky looks like pink. What is pink? Cotton candy. That's a very kind of pleasing thing. It's got the exact same color as cotton candy, at least the pink one, and it's morning and breakfast. So you can start applying these techniques as you go. Third trick is brevity. This is Hemingway poetry, but your titles need to be short. The shorter, the better. Every word really counts. You should be thinking poetry, very, very precise, but boil it down to just one or two words. And if we apply what we've learned, this looks like what? It's a tree. They kind of, to me, they looked like fingers, that there were fingers coming out. And then add a very factual thing. This is fall, so it becomes fall fingers. Oop, going backwards. Or this, embers, just one word, that draws your attention to just the few leaves that are there. Or in this case, comet wreck, this notion of it's a shipwreck, very famous, again, classic location in California that many people have shot. But just putting comet and wreck together, it works really well. So the fourth trick or literary storytelling technique is the concept of archetypes. Archetypes are stories and situations that appear over and over and over and over again throughout history. They're copied, they're modeled. The Bible's a great example. King Arthur's a great example. All of these things are done, and it's history and mythology and folklore. And quite frankly, you can also apply pop culture now. So my friend Roger Hunt, incredible bird photographer out of the UK, named this photo Excalibur. And it is just, to me, actually, it's my favorite name for a photo ever, because you would never take this bird, I have actually no idea what bird it is, and then equate it with King Arthur. But once you do, you then see this kind of new majesty in the bird, and you're paying attention to the beak or the bill. But this notion of, the name for me completely transforms this photo. I remember this photo all the time now because it's called Excalibur. I am not a big bird photographer. I almost never do it, but I remember this one because of the name. Or shake like a man. This is something that like every one of our uncles have said to us, or our grandparents over time. They shake like a man, like it's something that you learn as a boy. But it's an archetype. It's done over and over and over again in our lives or in stories. The other trick is this notion of motion or tension or conflict, that two things are moving away from each other or they're colliding together, and it's really motion is really what's underneath it. Does the motion, can you pull that in? Irony, this notion, in this case, this is in Oaxaca. This woman is completely dressed in traditional garb, like head to toe, and she's on her cell phone. And it's just so ironic that is actually happening in this market. There's no tap to pay in this market. There's no DoorDash pickup. But naming the photo e-commerce creates this tension or this irony in the photo. Or bison that are snuggling. Like bison don't snuggle. They just kind of bump into each other. Now the reality is, I think I captured this right before the headbutt, so it really wasn't a snuggle. But in naming the photo and processing it a little softer, it actually creates a very kind of ironic picture, because you don't normally see this with bison. or swirl. This is simply the motion of the plants, and I am telling you that I want you to focus on the swirl here. Or descent. This is Peacham, Vermont, and this notion of, this is an ominous photo. There's fog. It's dark. The descent is not a positive word. You descend into debauchery or you descend into hell, right? Like it creates a spooky kind of eerie image. And this influenced my processing on this too. This could be a brighter photo. It could be a little more like morning mist, but I chose this direction based on the name. So the other thing you could do is imagine dialogue. So dialogue is a classic storytelling technique. We've all seen movies where the dialogue is bad and it completely ruins the movie. But this notion of being able to imagine dialogue. So in this case, this boy, like his mom's behind him, not paying attention. He's clearly scared. And imagining that he's maybe under his breath, whispering his mother's name, like children typically do when they're scared. The other is to deal in sound, different languages, or punctuation. So this notion of what is the sound that a horn makes, and can I put that into a word? Can I simply translate pig into a separate language and put an exclamation point on it, which implies, the sale or the potential offer that's happening in this photo. Another technique is alliteration, which is where two consonants typically follow one another in the word. So smugglers, shelter is a great example. Both words start with S. That's classic alliteration. It's very pleasing to hear that. You hear it in song and poetry all the time. I would probably avoid rhyme, which is sort of the next level of this, because rhyme is really hard to do well. It's really difficult. But even just, this could be called, this is in Oregon. This is, could be Cove in Oregon or inside the Cove. But when you say something like smuggler shelter, you create a little story here. Like there's a story that your brain can go on. And this notion of shelter, you kind of create the concept. It's very pleasing to hear this. And it, for people that you may be able to say, oh, is it a smuggler shelter? What are those markings on the walls? And by the way, this is a classic location in Oregon that probably has 100 photographers at it every day. But you're able to turn it into something else that's yours. Tunnel view at Yosemite. You could call this tunnel view at Yosemite or snow at tunnel view. But again, a little bit of alliteration, dusted at daybreak, right? Think about everything we've learned. What does this look like? Snow looks like dust, right? What time or day is it? Daybreak, put the words together, right? Maybe look at words that start with the same letter for some alliteration. But then you get, dusted at daybreak, which, kind of, I think, adds something to a very classic location. Again, there'll be 100 photographers lined up at this place every morning. Or, what does this look like? This is blue ice. I just got back from Greenland last month, which was incredible. Feels like you're standing in the Northern Lights. But the ice is really the star. And there's ice that is so blue, it looks unnatural. And I remember I was on the boat and I'm like, that looks like Gatorade. Like, it doesn't look like that. That can't be right. But, being able to say, hey, this is ice. Is there another word for ice I can use? It looks like Gatorade. Can I have some alliteration here? The other thing is to sketch a story. I alluded to this. This is plot or narrative arc, which is classic storytelling. They're to do this. So I typically don't tell the story behind how I took photos because it's really not the journey I want people to go on. I want to tell them a story. And for me, rarely the story is how I took the photo. So I'll just put that out there as like this. But I am going to tell you how I took this photo for purposes of learning today. So I was in Cuba. I was on a workshop. There's 20 of us in a workshop, and we all got half an hour with a model in a classic car. Guess what number I was in the lineup? 20. So I come in for my turn, my little camera, and this poor woman is just so done with this at this point. Her face is just sour. I ask her, I could barely get her to smile. And my brain was like, wow, you don't really seem excited for somebody going to a quinceanera. And then I just had this like idea of like, what if that's the story? That this is not a good moment. And I said, hey, can we pop the hood? So we popped the hood like the car was broken down. And it creates a story of broke down quinceanera, which is, allows you to use your imagination and to work with everything that's there. And quite frankly, differentiate my photo from everybody else's. Because I think we all struggle with that sometimes. Like we take the safe shot, right? Or we all go out and get the classic shot, and there's nothing wrong with that. But, I think sometimes we're always looking for how do I make this my own? And the words can help make it your own. I don't know if you're familiar with Dwayne Michaels, fantastic photographer, even better writer, quite frankly. And so this is a photo he took. This is a very famous photo. On the surface, this photo, in my opinion, is nothing special. It's a snapshot. Dwayne might disagree with me, but to me, this is like a snapshot. There's some nice emotion there, but this is an incredible story in its totality. And, this photograph is my proof. This photograph is my proof. There was an afternoon when things were still good between us, and she embraced me and we were happy. It did happen. She did love me. Look for yourself. This is beautiful, on this notion of it. It kind of looks like a Polaroid in the way that it's done, the handwriting, but this is a complete story right here. And I would argue you might blow right by this photo if you're looking at photos, but when you read this story, you remember this, and you're able to carry it forward. And that story or name can influence your composition and your processing. So this is Face Rock in Oregon. Again, 100 photographers there every day. And in landscape photography, there's a lot of hurry up and wait, right? Like you get there, like it's dark, like your headlamp, you're trying to get it to work, you set up, and you're waiting for light, or you're waiting for something to happen, or something like that. So you actually have like time in most cases, and you can use that time to say, what is the story here? And can I write a little story about what I'm seeing? Like, just open up your imagination if you can. So in this case, I was standing there and I noticed all these other rocks that were down, which on their own are not distinct in any way. And I kind of imagined like it was a person laying down almost. So I ended up like, oh, what if this was like a giant Titan from like the early days. And this is where it came, and it laid down to rest or die. And before I left that location, I was shooting Titan Rest. I was shooting the story. I wasn't just capturing data or just shooting face rock. I was on this story. And when I processed it, I made it intentionally soft to kind of give this notion of the word rest, right? Like maybe at peace. But this notion of your name can actually influence how you take the photo and how you process it as well, because you're trying to invoke an emotion with a name. And the way you process, as we all know, can really invoke a lot of emotion. So other thing that professional writers do and storytellers have done since the dawn of time is they do drafts. They write, they rewrite, they throw it in the garbage. Well, not they just delete it. But you have to like munch on the title for a while. There will be these amazing moments where it will come to you. Like El Jefe for me, boom, like didn't take long. But other titles, I will walk around my house thinking about that title for days for photos I really care about. And you may have to spend some time drafting the title and thinking about it and saying, what's another word for eat? Like, what's another word for bison? What's another word for snow? Like just really putting your brain on it. And when you do, good writers only get good by doing more writing, in the same way that we only get good by doing more photography. And it's the same with your titles. There are going to be some that you struggle on. It will take you days. I have gone back and renamed photos a year later. I'll be watching some TV show and somebody will say a word and I'm like, oh my God, that's the word. And that's the nature of brainstorming, is there's a lot of nothing and then there's something and you're like, aha, I've got it. And then it's back to nothing, as we all know. So if you're having trouble, writers and storytellers, they show their work and they get feedback, or they use other tools to assist them. So if you're really stuck on a word, like go back to the tricks from high school essays, go get the thesaurus and try and look smarter. I still do it when I get stuck, but thesaurus Rex is your friend here. Or, for the blowing horn video, like picture, I sent it to my daughter in college. I said, get your roommates. I want a title for this. And I put them to work. I crowdsourced it, essentially. What does a horn sound like? And, it allows you to kind of get there. This photo, I originally did not call it Trendsetter. I posted it on Facebook with a title that was so uninteresting I can't even remember it anymore. I think it was like Red Vermont or something. It wasn't good at all. And one of my dear friends said, Trendsetter. Like she zeroed in on that one tree, and that's exactly what I wanted. Some of the trees are ahead, and it became Trendsetter, which is a way better title than what I had done. I just got back from Greenland, amazing auroras and ice, but also I shot a lot of dead flowers, which is kind of ironic. You're surrounded by all this, but Greenland's very desolate. So in image review, I was with a group. I put up this photo. It was completely cropped differently. I had no title for it. I do almost no macro flower photography at all, which probably shows in this photo. And I said, I want some feedback. And my friend Toby pointed right at that like little part that looks like a mouth. And he said, that looks like a bird's mouth. And that brainstorming and help got me to Last Gasp, which is an appropriate name for a flower that's, or a plant that's on its last leg. But I would have never gotten to that. I did not see that as like a little bird mouth or as breathing without putting it out in the world and getting some feedback, not asking for the name, but just what is striking in the photo, which helps us as editors. We've all been through that like workshop of that. And writers do workshopping for that same reason. They get up, they read their stuff, they get feedback. In my case, when I did it, I would get feedback from my professor, like, not your best work. And then you would go back to it and you would work on it some more. And we've all done that with our photos. Like, we put it out there and the person would be like, is that in focus? Or like, some, and you're like, oh, yeah, maybe I should do something differently here. The other thing, names, you don't have to name every photo. First of all, you shouldn't name every photo, but you can also use the name for a group of photos and then not have to name every single one. So it can anchor a project. So, Broke Down Quinceanera is actually 3 photos from that day, which is like getting out of the car, it broke down, looking at the engine and disappointment. And in storytelling, this is acts, chapters, or verses. They all rarely actually have titles. They usually have a number. So you can put things together and tell a story and spend time on the name of that collection. I think we're all familiar with, Robert Frank's The Americans. Like the photos in here are like Salt Lake City, Utah. That is not the world's most interesting name, but The Americans is a great name for the collection. So being able to to name the collection really can add power to it. Okay, my grandmother, God bless her soul, still remains very important to me. And one day I got a gigantic promotion at work and I thought I was really like a hot ticket. And I was visiting with her and I was just like I'm the man. I was like bragging about it. And my grandmother, who never finished 6th grade, worked in a mill all her life, took care of her mother when she was dying, quit school, looked me square in the eye, and she's like, Bryan, you really need to try and be more witty. And it was just like this really like incredible moment of like, ooh, and it was her way of being like, that stuff's important, but I view it as she was speaking to my creative side. Here I am bragging about work and like, all quite frankly, all the non-creative stuff, and it was her way of saying, I think I've carried it forward this way of don't lose sight of the art in you. My advice to you here is that good storytelling is clever and witty. So a little bit of clever, a dash of clever goes a long way in your name. And that's why you should spend time on it and try and change the words and try and adapt them. But, so when I do my writing now, I always complete a draft and I'm like, is it witty? Like, does it have a dash of clever in it? Would Graham approve? Because a little bit will go a long way. The witty part is not the technical nature of it, how you took the photo or the fact that it was a 3-hour drive and you broke down twice. That's not the witty part of the viewer doesn't really care about any of that. And nor are you there, rarely are you there to explain it to them. So this little notion of a dash of clever can go a long way. So this photo, starts out as Sentry. It's actually a pretty good name. It tells a story that this particular animal is guarding or looking out over the, for predators. Then I changed it to Ram King, which I didn't really like very much because it sounded like a truck. And it was like the Ram King truck is now here. But then I'm like, I played with the words like, what's another king? What's another name? And then what happens if you change the words to the opening of The Lion King? I'm not going to sing it for you because I'm like very close to tone deaf, um, but what if you put that there? Is it too far? Will people get it? I don't know. But it's worth experimenting with. Sentry turns out to probably be the name I'll go with because I think this might be a little too far. But tell me what you think in the chat. I'd be interesting to hear that. Okay. Sensitivities, things we should be careful about. Religion is probably one of them. When you're in business, there's like the old adage, don't talk about religion or politics with clients, right? Or customers. I titled this Jesus for Sale because I think that's the story I want to tell, that there's this, photo of Jesus for sale, not that there's tires there or other things. So I've chosen the interpretation of this photo. And I think it works. I think, but when I did it, I was kind of like, okay, I'm talking about religion. I should be a little careful here. Here's a place where I think it works really well. I was born and raised Catholic, but, Stations of the Cross, all of these brackets look like crosses very clearly. And there's 3 of them, and you want the viewer to go down the line through the station. So I think you can use religion in an appropriate way, but I would just caution you to, if you use it, take a deep breath before you like send it out, and just make sure that you're not being inflammatory. It's your art. If your purpose is to be inflammatory in your art, that's fine. But it's not my purpose. My purpose is to really try and shape or tell a story. The other thing is like jokes, like, and quips, like they seem funny in the moment, but they rarely carry forward to people who aren't there. So I was in South Dakota taking pictures of abandoned places, and there was this house that burned down that turned into like this party zone with all these like beer cans. And I declared, I'm going to call this home cooking because it's the stove. And then like a day later, I'm like, that's really horrible. Like just like that was somebody's house. And, that is my intent here, is not to make fun of somebody's house burning down. So when you're in these situations, you have to ask yourself, what's the purpose of me publishing this? Like, is my purpose to like make a joke? And even if it was, I would argue it's not a good joke at all. And if it's sensitive materials, this is where journalism training can be really good. Where if you read ever, all of us have read papers, now even online, you'll see a photo and there'll be a description underneath that, and getting that can be the way that you can kind of deal with things appropriately, and it can signal your intent. Like, what is my intent in taking this photo? And I'm going to give you an example. So I published this photo, no title, no context, into a forum, a Fuji forum. The comments were unbelievable. I've never experienced anything like that. And I'm not saying that they're wrong in any way. Are you taking advantage of this woman? How do you think she feels? Did you pay her? Did you ask her to take the photo? And those are all legitimate questions. And in my case, as the artist, I didn't provide any of the story. I just put up a photo of somebody who's, quite frankly, in some despair. Those people did not know my intent in taking this photo. And I did have an intent. And the intent was I was working on a project literally called Cuba Waits. And there's whole notion of Cuba and how everybody is kind of waiting. They're waiting for things to happen. And while they're waiting, they're creating this amazing like art and food and all of that. That was my intent. And I actually had a whole bunch of photos of people waiting and talking and doing things while they wait, and artists that are laughing, on the stage after their performance. That was my intent, but that intent was completely lost without a title or a story to go with it. And that's a miss on my part, that people didn't understand what I was actually trying to do. And why? Because I left it up to them to determine. The other thing that can help you to find your purpose is, I don't know if you've ever done an artist statement. If you have, throw it in the chat. Like, you don't have to throw the artist statement in the chat, but you can raise your hand and talk about it. My favorite is actually Calvin's, which is like, my work is incomprehensible, therefore it's really important. Which is just a play off of every bad portrayal of an artist ever in popular culture. But you heard a bit of my artist statement when I started. I'm an amateur photographer and a professional writer and storyteller. And I've always been a sucker for a good story. Like, I've got 3,500 comic books sitting in my garage, like, tons of books sitting over. I am the biggest sucker for a story that ever lived. I love them. I consume them. That's who I am. And it's part of my artist statement. Your artist statement could be like, I take photos of fractured reality because I broke in the technical, you take them with a broken lens, but you're creating incredibly abstract art. That photo on its own does benefit a bit from an artist statement or a title. Otherwise, it could just look like it's broken. Okay, some practical stuff. If you sell your work, this is important. I personally really don't ever sell my work. I gift it a lot, but photography is not a business for me. But 15 years ago or more, the New Yorker did this study, and it's fascinating. It's called the Significant Object Study. And they went and they found these like incredibly cheap trinkets, like rubber ducky, this like weird like lead bunny thing. And they took all of them, 100 of them, and they asked professional writers and storytellers to write a story about them. And then they posted the objects on eBay for sale. The average price that they were able to get was 2,800% over what they paid for it. Now, I'm not saying that if you name your photos, you can expect a 2,800% gain on your pricing structure, because I actually don't know much about selling objects. But I do run a business and I do sell to people. And the best sale has a story, always. And the story, it ain't, oh, I was in Colorado last year and it was a banging fall. The story is something else that gets you that gain. So if you're selling your work, naming it will have an impact. Absolutely. So if you're going to sell something, I would encourage you to spend time on the name. 2, if you compete, if you've ever been in like PPA or other things, put it in the chat. Most of those places, you have to name your photo, and the name is actually part of the judging. It helps you rank. At PPA before COVID, like they would like announce the photo and kind of unveil it with your name. So the name matters in competitions and communities. In some cases, you have to do it. So you should do that. The other thing you could consider is framing with naming in mind. I know I said don't rhyme, but I did it. So, but what if you were to have in your map, you have the name there, and what does that look like? Where do you put it? How does it change the meaning of the photo? Do you need it? Is it a plaque that sits separately, like in museums often? But you should think about where the name sits in framing. I'm in the marketing business. Naming has some technical meaning to it now, like URLs, search engine optimization, all of that stuff. The world is getting more aggressive there. So if you're selling your work and your photo has a name, there's a connection there. And we're not going to get into a lot of that. And the final is you got to be careful with legalities and trademarks. Like if you're going to name your photo Taylor Swift and sell it, it's probably not a good idea. And let's say it's not Taylor Swift. Let's just say it's a tailor working really quickly on a fast sewing machine, and you call it Taylor Swift, right? You are technically violating her trademark for commercial purposes. Now, do I think Taylor Swift is going to come after you? I don't know. She seems really into revenge in her lyrics, maybe. But but you should just be careful about trademarks and considerations and proper names and things like that. The other thing is, this is very practical, and this is not really for the art side of your equation. It's more for your emotional and legacy oriented. Is that, someday when I die, I don't think anybody's going to go through my Lightroom. Like, I don't think anybody's going to be like, oh, we got to go through his Lightroom and get that picture of a shoe I was talking about earlier before we started. Like, nobody's going to go. The pictures are insanely important to me, but I also feel they're part of my creative being and part of my legacy. So I have to make that available to people. And it's not available digitally, quite frankly, unless you create that drive, you name it, you talk about, you tell people that you have portfolio photos and you would love to gift them out to people, or just remembering, this is a long time ago for me at Riverside Park with my beautiful wife, still married today. If I were to cut off Riverside Park, I don't remember when or where we took this down. And that actually bugs me a little bit. So, if we've all experienced the passing of loved ones, like my dad passed 2 years ago, one of the only good things to ever come out of that was, look at all these photos. Some of them have writing on the back. They're not his art photos, they're family photos. But, print your work, maybe write something on the back of it, maybe write that little story, like, Dwayne Michaels. I could write a Dwayne Michaels thing on the back of this, and it's there for my wife and it's there for my daughter, and then maybe my grandchildren, about something cool that day. And that has incredible meaning that goes way past you. So you may want to consider, when you do your collections, maybe writing a little note about them, printing, because who knows if Lightroom or whatever your art, however you digitally process, is going to even be around in 10 years, or the drives that are spinning on our desk now are now like microchipped in our heads. Like, who knows? But spend some time thinking about your story as an artist and how you would like that story to continue. And the practical consideration is, people treasure photographs. They treasure them. They treasure handwritten notes. They treasure handwritten recipes from their grandmother. Like, this is the place to go a bit old school, and it'll be worth it. So, getting started. For writers and storytellers, this is the blank page problem. You open it up and the page is blank. The cursor's just blinking at you. You just don't even know where to start, okay? By the way, the title of this photo is Getting Started. So, how do you start? Couple things. The mechanics is almost never the story. How you took the photo is not the story. In the same way that how Hemingway wrote is not of interest to 99.9% of the population. It's a little interest to me because I write. But the story is not that you drove 3 hours through the rain, or it was a dark and stormy night, like the greatest cliche opening ever. It's powerful still, but dark and stormy night is good, but you're not there to tell the story of your photographs all the time. They should stand on their own, and a way that you help them stand on their own and show your intent is to name them. I talked about face rock. Spend a few more minutes on the story before you take the picture. If you're in landscape photography, which is 90% of what I do, you have the time. You're literally sitting there saying, man, my hands are cold. Where are my gloves? Like, I'm hungry. I forgot my coffee. Like, you're sitting there thinking about a million other things. Think about the story. You have the time. You're sitting there. Like, be like, oh, I wonder what John Muir thought when they saw tunnel view. Oh, there's no water in the waterfall. Why is that? Like, create the story. Make story as important as light and composition. We treasure light and composition in our photography. Put the story up there. Doesn't have to be first, but it deserves a seat at the table with that. Do not go back. If you look at my website right now, which I haven't updated in a very long time, there's not a single named photo. Not one of them is named. Why? Because I didn't really believe in it that much when I built my website. I didn't think it was as important as I do now. So start it now. If you are going to post an image, give it a name. Your portfolio images, they deserve the most effort. The ones that you just love. Like, I know many people do calendars, or like the Instagram box at the end of the year, or all of that. Put the time and energy to name those photos. It's 12. That's a lot of work to name 12 photos, but start it now. You don't have to go back through history. That's daunting. That's like trying to clean out all your old photos in one fell swoop. You'll just get incredibly frustrated. Build the habit. Every time you post, name it. And if you're having trouble naming it, all your photographer friends are on your social media. Say, I named it. I don't like it. What should I name it? I know 2 professional photographers who sell hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in prints. And all the time in my feed, they're like, what should I name this? They don't know. They're crowdsourcing it. And they're the pro, supposedly the pros, right? If you're doing image reviews, if you're in communities, or you have camera clubs, or that, ask about names. Like, say, what would you name this? If you're in a workshop, what would you title this? And then you could always write a short little narrative or an article or a presentation. I didn't really, when I started writing about photography more, that's when all of this kind of merged for me. So just write a little short narrative. It doesn't have to be win a Pulitzer. But, write the little Dwayne Michaels thing and put it on a Post-it and put it on the back of the photo, or, create a document that you just paste a clip of the photo and write a little thing next to it. But just start now. Just take a couple small steps. And because publishing, quite frankly, has never been easier. So my friend, Don Toothaker, his artist statement is photograph what you feel. That's his artist statement. He says it all the time. So that's his intent, right? He's made that clear. That's his genre, right? Just like a science fiction writer, or, that's his genre in literary terms. So he had kind of a rough week and had this little crisis of faith. He's been on a lot of workshops, and he got sick. And he posted a picture of a church steeple or cross at a beautiful location he was at. And the photo doesn't have a title, but it has intent, which is photograph what you feel. And that's essentially the title for this photo for the time being. And it works really, really well. Do projects. So I've done a few projects on Cuba. But the cover of the project for this was an interactive spin through Cuba with a photo of a car. So again, you can relate your intent and your project to an actual picture. This picture on its own, although I love it quite a bit, is not incredibly, it isn't in my portfolio or would be in my portfolio. But you can go, Adobe has this thing called Adobe Express, also called Spark or Page, where you can essentially create these almost like photo journals where you can add text. So imagine you came back from your trip or doing street photography in San Francisco and you put 7 photos together and you tried to put some text next to them. Incredibly easy to do. So easy to self-publish now. And then you can always just write articles, right? So this is how I often start naming photos or things like that. Not every name needs to be brilliant. This is the point raised rec that you saw at the beginning of my presentation. It's the point raised rec. There is nothing clever about that name. Like people literally call it the point raised rec. You want to know why? I don't really have a good name, a better name for this. So the factual name works and it's okay. And remember what we learned? Like, what am I looking at? What does this look like? What time of day is it? But it's a very simple, just straightforward name. And finally, I'll kind of leave you with this is this is one of my favorite photos I've ever taken, which took me 2 weeks to name. I wanted to post it so bad and I held myself to, you're not posting this until you name it. That's what you have to do. And I was stuck in traffic 2 weeks later. I'm like, this commute really sucks. And I'm like, wait, lunar commute. And it came to me. But there's more than one right answer. I think many of you are familiar with Dewitt Jones, National Geographic, very famous TED Talk. I saw him speak live once, but it's your art. Like, there's more than one right answer in the same way that there's more one composition, crop, there's color, not color, there's split tone. There's more than one right answer in your art. And, spend time trying to find that story answer because for me, and I can only speak for myself as an artist, I find it actually makes me a better photographer. It certainly makes me a better storyteller. And if my intent and my purpose is to tell stories with my photos, then stories have to have a title. The story is not like a blank cover by Bryan Scanlon. Like that's not what it is. And I also want to shape the perception of my viewers. I want to do that. I do it with light. I do it with dodging and burning. I do it with cropping. I do it with a million other ways. And I'm also choosing to do it with words. So with that, I'd love to just see if folks have questions or things you're struggling with or why you think you'll never title a photo. How do you feel about this?
Okay, Brian, I'm going to ask you to take your screen down so we can see your face. I'm scanning through here and I'm just a little surprised and shocked that there are no questions in here. My head, actually there were a lot of nice comments in here. I'll start with that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so
kind.
it's not so much that there was a lot of information in here. For me personally, I I kind of giggled when you said, the blank page with a blinking cursor. And I completely relate to that because
Yeah.
have a lot of, I personally, I travel a lot and I have a lot of, in my mind, they're great stories of, of, of why I took a picture or what, what I experienced. But when I get in front of a computer, my brain just goes blank. And
Yeah.
for the last 45, 55 minutes that you did your presentation, I'm sitting here thinking, you just made this so easy. Why don't I do that? And so I can promise you that I won't watch this again, because even though I heard every word you said, there were a lot of things and that you simplified. I can remember taking a writing class as a very young teen, and some of the things that you said were very fundamental, and you're driving them home now. I want to try harder. So this was really, really good. And
Oh, thank you.
I knew this was going to be a good presentation. What I didn't know was you right off the bat said, I'm an amateur photographer. And I'm like, there was nothing amateur about the photos that you used to support your presentation. They were
Oh,
beautiful.
thank you. That's very, very
So
kind. Yeah.
there was one question that slipped in here. Somebody was asking about, uh, gosh, there are a lot of comments. Okay, Susan's curious. What was the Adobe feature you mentioned just a few minutes ago?
It's called Spark, but it's now in another package. But if you type in Adobe Spark into search, it'll come up.
Okay.
And it should be free, or if you subscribe to the little Photoshop package that I think most of us probably do, you should get that. But I love it because it's so much of what we do now is interactive. And I view it as the modern slide carousel. That's how I view it, of like, I could put several things together and just put a quote from an author. I don't even have to title the photo sometimes, but I can show a little vignette. And a couple people commented, and I want to comment on something that people said
Mhm.
is that it's very hard for you to name photos. It's very hard for me to name photos, and I'm in the public relations writing marketing business, and it's hard for me to write photos. Why? Because we're emotionally attached to our art. It's our baby, right?
Mhm.
So it's hard for us to actually be objective on our photos, which is why we put them out for critique, because we need somebody to say, hey, knock it off with the saturation, right? So we do need that, but it is hard. It does require some work and brain space. And when you get stuck, ask for help. Like, go to Thesaurus Rex, put it out on social. Again, people who make very good money selling titled photos will crowdsource those titles when they get stuck. So we ask for advice online all the time about like our ingrown toenail. Why wouldn't you ask about it for a photo title, right? you
Way
know,
to,
like,
way to bring it
I don't know
down.
why I came up with that one, but that one's
I swear to God, if I see any of that in my feed, people, I'm gonna block you. Hey, there's a question in here from David. Um, he says, I noticed a lot of images appear black and white with some areas colored. How does the style of photography help you to create the naming?
So it might be just the way that they appear, but usually my stuff is either black and white or color. But sometimes it can be very desaturated. Sometimes I will saturate a bit, but I think for me, um, style is related to the name, and they're symbiotic. So if we remember the photo of Titan Rests, right? That could have been all about the power of the ocean with crisp waves and really sharp texture on those rocks where it's been carved away. That's a style decision that could be based on the name. I chose a name that was more peaceful. So I chose to process it kind of soft. Well, actually, really soft. It's not even kind of. There are parts of that photo that look out of focus. And that was my artistic decision. So I do think it can impact it can and should impact your processing. And by the way, the processing can impact the name too. Like you may be fiddling with a photo and end up in a direction, and the story may come at that point for you. But it definitely impacts how you do things.
Okay.
And people say they're not creative enough. Um, Again, not all your names need to win Pulitzer Prizes. It's the point raised rep. At least I named it.
Yeah.
Like, just give it a name and try it. Challenge yourself to it. And I would also challenge that if a photo can't be named, I think you could also argue potentially that the viewer doesn't really know what that photo is about or where to focus. So ask yourself that. I do it all the time. There are photos where I'll be trying to name, and it turns out that the photo actually doesn't deserve a name. It doesn't tell a clear story, or it doesn't have a clear subject, or it doesn't invoke an emotion. It's a snapshot. Like it's valuable as a photo, but it's not art for me, right? It's just a snapshot, which has value, but it's not art. And for me, sometimes it helps me cull my art. Like I can't name it. Is the photo good enough to be in the top of the list, to print, to give to somebody? Do I want people to hang it on their wall? So do you put your names in your EXIF so you remember what you named it? That would be a really good thing to do, Jamie. it just occurs to me that is brilliant.
That's brilliant, isn't it?
I name them when I export them, if I have the name.
Mm-hmm.
So just in terms of my workflow, if I'm shooting in Montana in 2022, all those photos get named Montana 2022 or whatever the original file number is. Okay. And then when I do something with that photo and export or share it, I will rename the photo with the name in it. And then it has a life and name. Again, it has power on its own then. Yeah. And then it'll show up in my catalog as that. But yeah, I should totally put it in the keyword and the metadata. That's like, duh, yeah.
I love that you learned something, and that's a great.
We're all learning. So yeah, there's always. Thank you, Jamie, for that suggestion.
Right. One last question I see from Barry here. On social media, along with naming an image, do you also create a fictional story or a small vignette as an added creative value to the image?
I don't do a ton of that, but I want to do more of it. And it's mostly like these are all lame artist excuses, which I'm going to give you. I'm really busy. I have my own business. Like I got employees. Like I work like a dog. Like whatever. But I should, And this is the part about your legacy of like writing, like that picture of Stacy and I. Like it would be beautiful if I wrote a little note in the back of that just said, 50 years later, we're still riding roller coasters. Like even just a little thing like that.
Yeah.
That's so I think the next step for me as an artist is I have no shortage of photos, like all of you, is to then say, I love this photo. Is there a story I could write with it? I do a lot of projects or exhibits. Like I've done like 4 or 5 exhibits, and I usually write something to go with the exhibit that I try and make clever or have a theme, like Cuba Winks, like that had a theme. But, I think it's a good challenge, to do that and say, okay, Bryan, you're going to be the storyteller. Write the story. Yeah. And you can't publish it until you do it. Ooh. Big challenge. But could I write 12 vignettes a year? I think for me as an artist, I mean, I take a lot of photos. I like tons of them. But at the end of the year, if I have two photos that I adore and would put on my wall, I'm very happy. If I have 12 that I think are really powerful, then I'm ecstatic.
Yeah.
So the two, they should certainly get a story, right? Start it now. And the other 10, why not? And if I can't write a story, maybe it shouldn't be in the 12. Maybe it's only 10 or 6 because that's my intent, right? I should live up to my intent, which we all try and do, and we never live up to our full intent, obviously. But I like Mark. I love Simon Baxter. I actually he has an exhibit right now, and there's a beautiful like little YouTube discussion about his woodland photography. That's brilliant. So if you haven't checked that out, he's but his woodland, he's my favorite woodland photographer by I don't even think there's anybody close in my opinion. But I also like his processing style, which is a little softer. It emphasizes light, so it also speaks to my taste in art. But I'm glad you brought that up, Mark. Everybody should check out Simon Baxter if you like woodland photography. It's amazing, and he does incredible names. I'm trying to think of the name of my favorite photo of his, but the name is brilliant. I should put it in this presentation, actually.
Bryan, thank you for coming and sharing what and this is something you do as a profession, and it seems to roll so easily off your tongue. And for someone that has a hard time writing, I'm struggling, but I'm very envious. And I am going to make a concerted effort to try and name at least the next couple of photos that I post in, and that'll be because of you. Because
Oh, thank you.
I tend to be lazy. So
Just start it now. All you have to do is start now.
all right.
Don't worry about all the rest of it. Just the
Yeah.
next one, try it.
Just got to try it. Well, like I said, I appreciate you coming. I'd loved having you. Your presentation exceeded. I mean, I knew it was going to be good, but you even exceeded my expectation.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you. I
I
had a lot of fun.
I'm glad that you were able to say yes to me, and the people in this room I know appreciate it. I'm going to share these comments with you, and I'll circle back and definitely make sure you get everything that was produced tonight. Guys, you can connect with Bryan through his website, bryankscanlon.com. And if you're on Instagram, you can find him at bkscanlon. Next week, Lightroom expert Tim Gray joins us to share his tips and answer your questions in his presentation, Optimizing with Maximum Control in Lightroom Classic. So until next time, go out and create something beautiful, and hope that we see you again soon.